The city of Sakai, Japan is world famous for its chef knives, but its history is rooted in iron. Emperor Nintoku's death in the 5th century brought Japan's most skilled blacksmiths to manufacture tools of iron to build the emperor's tomb. This was the birth of Japan's iron-making traditions. Between 1368 and 1394 in Sakai, blacksmiths began making Japanese swords. In 1600, Japan imported tobacco leaf from Portugal. They needed knives for chopping tobacco leaves. This was the birth of the first Japanese iron knife for chopping. However, Sakai's iron was not only used for knives. In the 1600s, Japanese gunsmiths preferred Sakai's iron because of its exceptional quality. Forging methods that began in the 13th century were also used for samurai swords. Finally, in 1683, the first Japanese chef knives were manufactured in Sakai. Many of these methods are still used today by master artisans who manufacture modern Japanese yanagi and Western chef knives. This tradition of Japanese knife making continues today. Craftsmen with more than 20 years of experience cut, shape, and polish each handle. The highest quality knives are often hand engraved with the company's name. In this case, custom made for Korin. Special skills are required for every part of the knife-making process, which can be divided into 3 main parts, each conducted by a different tradesman. The first man forges the iron and produces the pattern for the blade. After the soft iron pattern is heated and removed from the forge, Mr. Doi glues a metal strip of carbon steel to the blade. This glue is 20% sodium, 60% boric acid, and 20% iron oxide. Mr. Doi puts the blade back into the furnace. Mr. Keijiro Doi is a famous knife craftsman. He uses a coal-powered furnace to heat iron to a temperature more than 900 degrees Celsius. Using the darkness of his workshop, Mr. Doi can determine the knife's temperature simply based on its color. In this part of the process, the knife's temperature is critical. The iron's quality and even the time of year affect how Mr. Doi shapes the knives. Once the knife is heated to the proper consistency, Mr. Doi removes it from the furnace and hammers it approximately 300 times to remove impurities. A machine hammer pounds the basic pattern into what will become the knife's handle and shape. Mr. Doi returns the knife to the forge. In this part of the process, he keeps the forge's temperature at 750 degrees Celsius. Mr. Doi continuously observes the iron's color to determine its temperature. Mr. Doi moves the basic knife pattern in and out of the forge and into and out of a container of ash to gradually decrease its temperature by several hundred degrees. He hammers out more of the iron's impurities. This cooling down and pounding of the knife is called yakinamashi. This is how Mr. Doi shapes the blade to a specific knife style. Mr. Doi's son uses an electric grinder to begin the polishing process. Then the knife goes back into the forge. Next, he pounds both sides of the knife to create the correct shape. Again, Mr. Doi's son grinds the knife. After several minutes of difficult pounding and grinding, Mr. Doi dips the knife into a muddy solution. This special coating allows the knife to reheat evenly while it's being forged. Now the knives are ready for the next stage. This is the beginning of the knife-making process called yakire, a heating, cooling, and reheating technique that gives Japanese knives their hardness and flexibility. Mr. Doi puts the knife back into the forge. If the knife's properties are not just right, it will crack or become damaged in the next part of the process. Mr. Doi taps the forged knife on a metal surface and listens for its sound. When its sound and color are right, Mr. Doi dips the knife into cold distilled water. This ends the akire part of the knife-making process. Mr. Doi can produce only 10 to 12 of these handcrafted knives a day, far fewer than manufacturers that mass-produce their knives. However, the knife is still not finished. Before the knife is ready for use, it needs to be polished, sharpened, and the handle attached. In this part of a 25-step sharpening process, a piece of wood or bamboo with a special sand is used to polish the blade road. Sharpening the knife is the last step before attaching the handle. Mr. Oda, Japan's best-known knife sharpener, hones the middle of the blade road. He completes the process by sharpening the knife's tip. Mr. Oda looks to see if the blade is ready for the handle. Chiharu Sugai heats the knife's stem and attaches the wooden handle onto the knife. He then taps the handle firmly onto the knife. Finally, he examines the knife's handle to make sure it's on straight. Using a combination of machine and traditional iron making and sharpening techniques, these Japanese artisans create knives that are world famous for their durability and sharpness.
Hello, my name is Chiharu Sugai, and I'm going to show you how to sharpen a Western style and yanagi knives. Whether you are cooking Italian, French, or Japanese cuisine, a well-sharpened knife is a chef's most important tool when preparing food.
First, I want to tell you about the stones used to sharpen knives. Rough stone, medium stone, fine stone, and stone fixer. The grade of the rough stone is 80 to 220. This grade of stone is not for beginners. It's used only for repairs and for sharpening very dull knives. Used incorrectly, it can easily damage a knife. Plus, it takes considerable effort, skill, and time to achieve the proper edge. Therefore, I suggest that if you have a damaged or very dull knife, to call me and I will repair or sharpen it for you. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to sharpen a dull knife. The grade of the medium stone is 1000. The medium stone is the most popular among chefs. The grade of the fine stone is 5000 to 8000. A grade of 6000 is the most useful. When you buy a knife, be sure to budget for a sharpening stone and a stone fixer. These three items are important for every serious chef. If you buy only one stone, buy a medium stone. But if you want a razor-sharp edge, you'll also need a fine stone. Soak the stones in a bucket of water for about 10 minutes. Although you can soak most stones up to a whole day, ceramic and diamond stones lose their quality if you leave them in the water for more than 10 minutes at a time before using. Wet the towel so it won't slip when you're sharpening the knife. If you wish, you can use a stone holder. Add a few drops of water to make sure that the stone's surface is moist. Now I will show you how to use the stone fixer. You need a stone fixer to maintain an even surface on the sharpening stone. First, we grind off the edges on the long sides of the stone. Next, we grind the short sides. Finally, we grind the flat surface of the stone until it's smooth and flat. Now I will show you the parts of a chef knife. This is the ago, or heel. This is the kisaki, or tip. The area just above the edge is called the blade road. The line above the blade road is called the shinogi. The blade road is the area between the shinogi line and the edge. This is a yanagi knife. As in the chef knife, this is the ago, or heel. This is the kisaki, or tip. This is the blade road on the yanagi knife. The blade road on the yanagi knife is wider than on a chef knife. This graphic shows the parts of the gyuto, or chef knife, and the yanagi knife. The red shows the shinogi line above the blade road. Most knives need sharpening on the top side and back side. This is the top side of the knife, and this is the back side. But unlike German knives, Japanese knives are not sharpened evenly on both sides. In the example on the left, the Japanese knife is sharpened with 6 or 7 strokes on the top side and 3 or 4 strokes on the back side. The German knife, in the right example, is sharpened with 5 strokes on both sides. I recommend the ratio on the left when sharpening a Japanese knife. Hold your knife in your right hand. Place your thumb on the back side of the knife. Place your index finger on the top or spine of the knife. Your thumb and index finger on your right hand control the angle and stability of the knife so that the greatest area of the knife maintains contact with the stone. To set the angle of the knife to the stone, hold the knife at a 30-degree angle, or at about 5 o'clock to the stone. Using your left hand, place your index finger and middle finger about 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters from the knife tip. Remember that the sharpening takes place directly beneath your fingers, so make sure that you place them above the edge, not in the center of the blade. Keep your fingers near the edge and your knife will sharpen properly. The longer your strokes, the more efficient your sharpening. You must place the knife at the correct angle to the stone. Place the shinogi of the knife flat or parallel against the stone. The top right-hand example is too high. It doesn't touch the blade road. The lower right example is too low. It doesn't touch the edge and it breaks the shinogi line. Here's a trick of the trade to set the correct angle of the blade road to the stone. First, place 2 pennies under the top side of the knife. For the back side, use 3 pennies. I'm going to show you a common beginner's mistake. This angle is incorrect because it's too flat to the stone. The blade road doesn't touch the stone. Here's the same mistake on the back side. If you try to sharpen your knife this way, you'll never achieve a professional edge. Now I'm going to show you the correct way to sharpen a chef knife. We begin on the top side. Make sure you use the correct finger position. Use the fingers on your left hand to move the knife upward along the surface of the stone. Combine your upstroke with consistent pressure from the bottom of the stone to the top. Release your pressure on the downstroke. After the downstroke, move the knife up 1 finger's distance. If you're a beginner, try placing the finger pads of your left hand half on the blade road and half on the stone. But be careful. Placing your fingers half on the blade road and half on the stone can result in a cut finger. However, for beginners, this is the most efficient position to sharpen the blade. As you become more skilled in sharpening, you'll find a place slightly above the blade road to place your fingers. If you spread your fingers too far apart, holding the knife steady will be more difficult, and you will not achieve a proper edge. If you're a beginner, apply pressure only on the upstroke and lift the blade slightly on the downstroke. This will help prevent you from cutting your finger. Be sure to keep your fingers positioned directly over the stone's surface and above the area of the knife you're sharpening. If your fingers extend over the edge of the stone, the knife will not make proper contact with the surface. As you sharpen the top side, you'll feel a slight ridge develop on the back side. When you feel a ridge along the entire length of the backside, the top side is finished. Now you're ready to sharpen the back side of the knife. Hold the knife with your thumb on the spine of the knife and your index finger on the top side. Start at the top of the stone. Remember to use 3 pennies to set the angle of the blade to the stone. Pull down with consistent pressure to the bottom of the stone. Slightly release the pressure on the upstroke. When you sharpen the back side of a knife, the angle of your arm to the stone constantly changes. Keep sharpening the back side until you feel a slight ridge on the top side. To remove this ridge, make several long downward diagonal strokes across the stone. Now I'll show you how to sharpen a knife that has an edge primarily on one side. This particular knife is called a slicer. Sharpen the top side of a slicer the same way as a chef knife. Keep sharpening until you feel a slight ridge along the entire edge on the back side of the knife. Now I'm going to show you how to remove the ridge. Keep the knife angle nearly flat on the stone and pull downward in a diagonal direction. This will remove the ridge without dulling the sharpened edge on the top side of the knife. Now I'm going to show you how to sharpen the tip. The part of the knife that is about 2 inches from the tip is called the kisaki. It's important to follow the curve of the kisaki when you sharpen the knife tip. Otherwise, you'll change the shape of the kisaki. When you sharpen the tip, be sure that the edge between the kisaki and the heel does not make contact with the stone. Lift your right elbow until only the kisaki touches the stone. Then make a slight arc as you sharpen along the edge of the kisaki. Keep sharpening in this manner until you feel a slight ridge. Now I'll sharpen the kisaki and the back side. As on the top side, be sure to touch only the kisaki to the stone. Now I'll show you how to sharpen a petty knife. Make sure that the entire kisaki touches the stone as you sharpen the tip. Beginners often make the mistake of bending the kisaki part of the knife, thus preventing the knife tip from touching the stone. The kisaki on a petty knife is somewhat more flexible than on a chef knife, but you can use the same technique to sharpen the kisaki on both styles of knives. This tip sharpening technique works well for flexible petty knives. Bend the knife slightly to make an arch. Now just the tip will touch the stone. When you sharpen the back side of a petty knife, follow the line of the kisaki. This is the same as when you sharpen the backside of a chef knife. Now I want to remind you of some important points when sharpening your knives. You'll see some residue on your stone when you sharpen your stainless steel knives. This residue is called toguso. Although some books on knife sharpening say to wipe the stone clean of this residue, I suggest you leave it there as you continue to sharpen. This fine residue acts as a sharpening compound, much in the same way as a fine sharpening stone. Another point I want you to remember concerns your finger position. Keep your fingers close to the edge of the blade. The correct finger position will achieve the sharpest edge with the least amount of effort. Another common mistake is not keeping the same angle of the knife to the stone on both the upstroke and downstroke. In this example, my mistake is that I altered the angle of the knife to the stone on the downstroke. As a result, I increased the sharpness of the edge on the upstroke, but decreased it on the downstroke. Obviously, if I continued to sharpen in this way, my knife would never become really sharp. Remember to avoid this common mistake, angling the knife too flat to the stone. Now I will show you an advanced sharpening technique. After 2 or 3 up and down strokes, check the blade road to see how much of it has been sharpened. If the stone has not reached the shinogi line, or has exceeded it, adjust the knife's angle to the stone accordingly. Continue with another 2 or 3 up and down strokes and check again. Make any needed adjustments. Be especially careful not to sharpen above the shinogi line. With practice, your hand will find the correct angle that sharpens the entire shinogi. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to use a fine stone. Before you begin, be sure to position the 2 stones at the same angle. Position the knife at the same angle as you did the medium stone. If you use the same angle of the knife to the stone, you'll make the same pattern of scratches on the shinogi. Also, if you use 2 pennies under the top side while sharpening on the medium stone, use 2 pennies under the top side when using the fine stone. Here's an advanced technique for sharpening the edge of your knife. If you use 2 pennies beneath the top side to find the right angle, tilt the knife's angle slightly higher so that the fine stone makes contact with only the very edge of the blade. Take extreme care not to tilt the knife too much. If you do, you'll dull the edge. Use the same technique to create the sharpest edge on the knife's backside. Here's another trick of the trade for sharpening all knives. but especially a stainless steel knife.
中砥石を使った後に仕上げをかけます。
After using a fine stone,
で、普通はこの仕上げをかけた時点で終わり。
wipe the blade clean and glide it over a moist sheet of newspaper or leather razor strap. This will remove the smallest particles of metal from the knife's edge. Now I'll show you how to sharpen a yanagi knife. The yanagi knife has a sharpened blade only on the top side. The yanagi's backside is not flat. It's curved slightly inward. We call this curve the uraski. The uraski gives the knife its flexibility and keeps the topside edge sharp and durable. The uraski also allows the food to separate cleanly after it's been cut. Before you sharpen the yanagi knife, you'll need to fix your sharpening stone. If the stone isn't flat, you'll decrease the uraski on the yanagi's backside. When I sharpen the yanagi, I'm careful to follow the angle of the shinogi line. This is important because the shinogi line is that point on the knife where the fish separates after it's been cut. A properly sharpened yanagi is why the sliced fish looks so beautiful, so never break the shinogi line. Make sure your stone is wet and that you follow the angle of the shinogi line. But remember that you are only sharpening the very edge, not the shinogi line itself. If you can hold the knife with 3 fingers without the use of your right hand, the angle to the stone is correct. This is the correct angle. Now I'm going to show you the correct position for your fingers on the yanagi's blade. Place your fingers near the edge. Remember that the sharpening takes place directly beneath your fingers. Apply pressure on the upstroke. Use less pressure on the downstroke. After each downstroke, move the knife forward little by little. The yanagi's edge is very delicate and can be easily damaged if you keep the knife in the same position for too many strokes. Be sure to hold the knife steady as you sharpen, or you'll break the shinogi line. If you tilt the knife as you sharpen, you'll break the shinogi line. This is the correct angle. So when you move your right hand, be sure to keep it steady. Here's a hint for beginners. The edge on the yanagi knife is very sharp, so just apply pressure on the upstroke and lift up on the downstroke. Also, the ridge on the yanagi is sharp, so be careful with your fingers close to the ridge as you press down to sharpen. Keep sharpening until you feel the ridge. To remove the ridge, you must apply pressure to the knife's backside, but only on the upstroke. We call this process of removing the ridge uraoshi. Remember that removing the ridge is not sharpening, so keep the angle of the blade flat to the stone and keep your fingers positioned between the edge and the shinogi line. When the ridge is gone, you've completed the oraushi part of the process. Now I'll show you how to sharpen the tip of a yanagi knife. The tip extends about 2 inches from the point of the knife. The angle used to sharpen the tip is different than the angle used to sharpen the rest of the yanagi's knife edge. Touch the entire tip of the knife to the stone and slightly lift your right elbow so that you can apply more pressure to the tip. Here are more tricks of the trade that will help you find the best angle to sharpen the yanagi's tip. As you sharpen, imagine that the end of the knife extends an inch or so beyond the actual tip. Press extra hard on the entire tip as you sharpen it. Keep sharpening until you feel the ridge on the entire tip. Sharpen the edge where the tip and the previously sharpened edge meet by moving the knife in an arc-like path. Little by little, shift the angle of the knife to the stone. Keep repeating this motion. Until the scratch line on the tip and the remaining edge of the knife are smooth. I want to tell you about a common mistake chefs make when sharpening a yanagi knife, a mistake that can permanently damage your knife. Remember that the backside of a yanagi knife is curved so that it slices straight while retaining its flexibility and sharpness. A 1 millimeter line extends along the spine on the backside of the knife. In the top example, the line on the spine of the knife is too wide. The line on the spine of the bottom example is correct. Using a sharpening stone too often without fixing it will leave an uneven surface. If the stone is not flat when you remove the ridge, the line on the backside will widen. Remember, a widened line on the backside of a yanagi knife will decrease its efficiency, and it's impossible to repair. Here's another common mistake when sharpening a yanagi knife, this time on the shinogi line. If the knife's angle to the stone is inconsistent or too flat, you'll remove the shinogi line. Some chefs think that by erasing the shinogi line, their knife becomes sharper. This is incorrect. Instead, the blade becomes weaker, and the edge is more easily damaged. Plus, without a shinogi line, the food will not separate cleanly after it's been cut. Here's an advanced technique for sharpening a yanagi knife. Earlier in this program, I showed you how to sharpen near the yanagi's edge. Now I'm going to show you how to sharpen the angle at the shinogi line. If your knife is new, you won't need to sharpen the angle, at least not for a while. However, if you use your knife a lot and want to maintain the best edge, then follow these tips. Of course, you know, this is the shinogi line. When you sharpen the shinogi line, place your fingers directly above it on the knife backside. Here are 2 pictures that show the correct finger positions when sharpening the edge and the shinogi line. When sharpening the edge, place your fingers here and press. This is the correct finger position for sharpening the angle of the shinogi line. Once you have your fingers in the correct position, sharpen the shinogi line until you feel a clearly defined angle. A professional knife has two supreme qualities, a finely sharpened edge to slice and a precise shinogi line that cleanly separates the food after it's been cut. Next, I'm going to show you how to clean and maintain your knives. To clean your knives, you'll need a cleanser, a sponge, tap water, and a carafe of hot water. Place some cleanser on a wet sponge. Thoroughly scrub the knife. Use hot water to rinse the knife. Hot water facilitates drying. This is especially important when you clean your carbon knives. After you rinse the knife, wipe it dry with a clean towel. I'm going to tell you how to remove rust from a knife blade. We use cork to remove rust because it has abrasive qualities but will not damage the knife's surface. Never allow rust to accumulate on your knife. If you do, you will decrease its quality. Moisten the end of the cork and dip it into the cleanser. Use a circular motion. This removes the rust a little at a time. Then wipe it with a clean, dry towel. Finally, I'll show you how to store your knife if you're not planning to use it for a month or more. We have a special knife oil, but you can use vegetable oil to prevent the blade from rusting while in storage. Wipe the blade with a small amount of oil. Then wrap it in newspaper. The newspaper allows air to circulate around the knife. Plus, newspaper ink has oil in it that keeps rust from forming on the knife. Don't use plastic wrap because it prevents the air from reaching the blade.
You now know the traditional method for sharpening, the Japanese Western style and yanagi knives. Remember that it takes practice to keep your knives at their peak sharpness. But when you do, you will always achieve the chef's edge.